Okay, here's another subject we need to cover. Starting a computer system or an ICT system. When you start a computer, the first thing it needs to do is actually to check the hardware and load and run the operating system and any other utilities or software needed, and check and make any connections to networks or other systems that it needs to be able to actually use. The initial startup is carried out by a system of built-in instructions called the BIOS. Now the BIOS is stored in ROM, okay, so that's read-only memory so that it is not deleted, it can only be read and it cannot be written to. The BIOS will check all secondary devices that are attached to the computer and also will look for a suitable boot device to get the computer started. If it cannot find a device, it will load an error message. So, we've already mentioned that the BIOS will load the operating system once it has checked the devices. Now this is stored on a hard disk or flash memory. Hard disks are the most common because they have a huge storage capacity and very fast access time so that all the software can actually be loaded quite quickly. Now, flash drives are also used, or flash memory, and they are smaller, use less power, and are less likely to be damaged. They are usually used on smaller devices such as netbooks or smartphones, okay, because they use less power and obviously take up less space. Now, the reason flash drives are not used as commonly in larger sort of PCs are because of the costs involved with the flash memory, but this is gradually coming down over time. You can tell the BIOS to load not just from the hard disk of the computer, you can actually tell it to load the operating system from somewhere else. For example, it can load it from a CD or an optical drive or another hard disk. This is quite useful for when your computer has a problem and you need to restart the computer from the established default settings on a disk. Once the computer has loaded up the operating system and it's made the necessary checks and carried out connections and made connections to the necessary devices and networks, the computer is then ready to use. It is best to allow the computer to finish all of these checks before you start to use it, otherwise you can slow the computer down and it can prevent it from working properly. Okay, I need to tell you a few things about accessing a computer according to the specification for this qualification. So, sometimes when you use a home computer, you may be required to enter your user ID and your password. Okay, not ID. This is necessary to keep your information secure. For example, if your computer was stolen, you may have more chance of making sure that your personal details aren't accessed, but if you just want to keep certain things away from other members of your household, a username and password helps keep everyone's files separate. If you don't have admin rights or admin passwords, you may find that inexperienced users can change the settings of the computer to make it difficult to use. Okay, logins in schools and businesses take on a whole different level of importance. Every user needs to have a login and a password to enable activity to be tracked on a network and to be able to apply user rights, because not everyone requires the same access to the same devices or the same files. Using someone else's login is a serious breach of ICT legislation. This is obviously covered in the Misuse of Data Act. Shutting a computer down, well, it's not advisable to rip the plug from the wall or even switch it off at the wall, because this can cause a lot of problems because applications and files aren't properly closed. So what you really should do is obviously save your work first. Okay, that's one thing you should do. You should close any software that you have running. Okay, just get that down. And finally, you should make sure that you log out properly. Why is it important to log out? Well, it's particularly important because it makes sure that all your files and data are safe and they're not going to be used by the next user. This is particularly important in places such as cafes or libraries or in schools and business where lots of people could use the computer. It's not a private computer, it's a public computer. Not logging out of that computer and getting up and leaving it unattended means that anyone can sit down and use your files and your data. This can also obviously be used for illegal activities which potentially you could get the blame for. It's okay to shut down the computer after you've logged out. That's a good time to shut it down. You can also turn off any printers or anything else that is attached to the computer to save electricity. Shutting off devices also reduces the fire risk. So, adjusting settings on a computer. What can we adjust? Well, that depends what rights we have on a network. Okay, if it's a personal computer, you can obviously adjust a lot more things than you can do on a computer on a network. We can adjust screen size. We can sometimes change the time and date depending on what computer we're using. Our home computers, definitely we can. We can change the fonts used within the operating system, so message bars that come up and instructions, the fonts can be changed for that, and the colour schemes as well. I don't know who would want to do it, but you can change the mouse pointer as well if you need to, and the speed of it can also be changed. You can also have the mouse changed for left or right-handed use. Icons can be adjusted in terms of the image used or the size of the image or maybe the colour of the image. And also you can obviously change your username and password. Okay, if you're on a network you might need to get permission for that, but usually you can at least change your password with ease. Okay, now we're going to talk about managing files and folders. So this should have suitable names, both files and folders, so that you know where they are, and you know where to look for them, and you know when they have come from and what they actually include. Now the operating system will manage how they are put into storage, but it is the user who is responsible for choosing the file names and putting the files into a correct folder, and then the operating system can then write it to a certain location. There is usually a home folder, although it is sometimes called by a different name, usually My Documents, and this will be assigned to the user. If there are lots of users on a network, each user will have their own My Documents. Users can have folders within folders, such as obviously subfolders, so this can help to actually make documenting and keeping track of files and finding files when they're needed a lot easier. Right, once we've created a folder, there's a lot of things we can do. We can actually create a new folder. This will create a new folder within the folder, so basically a subfolder. We can rename it. We've got to be careful when we rename folders because, as we've seen from the troubleshooting video, sometimes if we rename a folder, the computer won't know where to look to find a file later on. Okay, we can move the folder. Again, that's had problems with from troubleshooting, as we've seen before. As long as we keep track of where we put things, we should be fine though. This will move the folder from its current location to a new one. We can copy the folder, very straightforward, and we can delete it. We can also perform a range of tasks with particular files. So we can rename files, we can move files, we can copy files, and we can delete files. Okay, these have the same implications as you can see on here. Okay, file extensions. Finally, these tell the computer which software to open. So when you click on a file in a folder, it will have .mp3 or .doc or a range of other 3-letter extensions, or even shorter than 3 letters, or sometimes longer than 3 letters, that will tell the computer which software needs to be used to open the particular file. So I've got a question for you. I'm going to say it's worth approximately 4 marks. This question is, what are the correct steps needed to be taken to shut down a computer? I would also like you to explain. Okay, I'm not going to fit this on, but I'd like you to explain each step. For example, why do we need to shut down programs? Why do we need to save our work? Why do we need to log out? Give it a go.